Far away in a northern land, there awaits a sad, very wet man. The old belief systems in Sweden and all of Scandinavia, really, centered around the majestic landscapes of the area. There was a great emphasis on respecting and working together with the forests, mountains, and waterways. Such a level of reverence for these spaces meant that people knew them to be protected, inhabited, or even haunted by mysterious and ethereal entities. The folklore from Scandinavia in general is rich with beings who embody the otherworldly beauty of the geography or the treacherous nature of it, in some cases. And today I've got a nerd request monster to share with you, and he comes from the wild folklore of Sweden, or Scandinavia in general, actually. If you'd like to make a nerd request and have me cover a monster, event, or generally spooky or mysterious thing, join my Patreon, shoot me an email, or comment down below. Before I get into it, do the things to the video so that people who like me will find me. Click on the buttons and type things and what have you. Since apparently people don't like listening to me do the spiel in the beginning, just let you know, click a button. Anyway, and now it's time. I'll get into it. Promptly. You got no attention span. So, the entity that I'm coming at you with today is sort of a fae-style creature who haunts the cold rivers and lakes of Sweden. This is a fun choice for me to obsess over right now because it's been a consistently dry 90-ish degrees up in here, and I live outside, mostly. So I've enjoyed thinking about a cold river all week. Where I come from, there's lots of cold rivers. There aren't a lot of cold rivers here. So this guy could easily lure me to my demise simply because I'm a little sick of being attacked by the sun. The Näcken is an ambiguous, often deceitful, sometimes malicious man who spends his time relaxing in the freshwater lakes and rivers of the European Northland. He sits alone on logs or stones playing a beautiful melody which echoes through the dim evening light. The most common, modern descriptions of this man say that he sits naked and plays a violin. They say that he is handsome in an otherworldly way, and he uses this pretty privilege and his haunting music to lure unsuspecting women and children into the water. When he has his prey securely within his realm of the water, he drags them down and drowns them. Some believe that he simply grabs onto people and holds them down so that the water can do its thing with their mortality. Other stories say that he actually bites and scratches at people. It is said that if the Näcken bites you, the bite will not heal. I could find only one good story about the Näcken's proclivity for biting his victims. Supposedly, within actual historical record, we have an example of the Näcken's mischief. According to the tale, the year was 1607. Picture it. Stockholm, Sweden. A man was minding his own business, doing his business in one of the city-operated outhouses. Our protagonist, as you imagine, was having himself a peaceful shit. Now, these outhouses were little more than a seat over a hole in the ground, with the water of the river running underneath. Natural plumbing. It's how God likes it. Well, as he sat there doing the deed, he got bitten on the ass. The man was terrified and his ass hurt, so he got up and he ran out of there. The wound on his booty was apparently pretty serious, and it wasn't healing properly. I imagine perhaps it was infected. So he had to go down to the doctor to have his wound treated. He was apparently furious that the city of Stockholm allowed a Näcken to live underneath their outhouses, where he could just go around biting people on the ass all willy-nilly. If you hadn't gathered by this time in the story, yes, the man firmly believed that a Näcken is what had bitten him while he was in the outhouse. And yes, he firmly believed that it was the city's fault that it happened. So, he sent the bill for medical care to the city's leaders. Many people laughed at this and accused him of being mad, like insane, or perhaps being a grifter. Most forward-thinking individuals of the time said that what bit him must have been some sort of weasel, or another common creature who lives along the rivers. However, as it would turn out, the city leaders themselves believed in the Näcken. They believed that it could have been a Näcken who bit this man's ass, and they were willing to take responsibility for the incident. The city of Stockholm agreed that the Näcken was the ass biter, and they paid for all of his medical bills. I'm going to put my boring rational person hat on here and suggest that they may not have necessarily believed that the attacker was a Näcken. They might have simply agreed that the man had been injured in one of the outhouses that they were responsible for, and so regardless of what attacked him, it was kind of their fault. If it were some animal, or if there were some rusty metal something or other on or around the seat or the walls, that was their fault. So either way, they probably just accepted that and didn't feel inclined to argue about what exactly caused his ass that specific damage. Regardless, it's a pretty funny story. So, this is only one of the many different versions of this creature that we know, but it seems to be the most widely known. As with so many other beings from old pre-Christian folklore, there are many stories that describe him many different ways, and the stories have changed and evolved over thousands of years. The evolution of the Näcken story is one thing about him that I find most fascinating. The different ways that he appears changes based on region, the evolution of language, shifting religious perspectives, and cultural norms. All of these things have influenced the stories we tell about the Näcken over the centuries. I don't often run into creatures that have stayed in our consciousness consistently enough to evolve with all of these different outside forces. So, this version I've told you of the Näcken as a sexy young man seems to be most popular in stories that come from Norway and the northern parts of Sweden. However, some say that he is actually an old and wrinkly man. In certain parts of Finland and southern Sweden, he often is described as not appearing as much of a man at all, but rather being somewhat like a humanoid frog. Although, regardless of what his natural or common form may be, he is almost always described as a shapeshifter. I love me a shapeshifter. So, perhaps he is a weird-looking frogman, but then he changes shape to appear beautiful when it suits him. Why wouldn't ya? They say that he often transforms into a sort of fish, or even an inanimate object, like a log. According to a few stories, these forms are primarily useful to him when he is observing, or rather, stalking, and sizing up his victims. Some say that he can change shape into a dragon, or a big white horse. When he's in his horse form, his name is Bäckahesten, and in this shape, he entices children to ride on his back so he can take them to the water to die. He can elongate and stretch out as like a Stretch Armstrong so that he can fit as many kids as he needs to on his back for the drowning train. I have seen only 2 sources discussing his ability to transform into the horse, and because it has a different name, I feel it may be possible that they are 2 different entities that do just something similar, like the same kind of thing. It's possible that they're so similar that the stories have sort of combined them. What do you think? The horse form is reminiscent of the Kelpie or the brook horse from folklore around the British Isles. I believe that Bäckahesten and the Näcken are 2 different creatures, right? Tell me what you think. Where by the marshes boometh the bittern, Näcken the soulless one sits with his gittern, sits inconsolable, friendless and foeless, waiting his destiny, Näcken the soulless. Sebastian Evans, 19th century poet. Most of the sources that I found across the internet have been very brief in their descriptions of the Näcken. They tend to simply explain a little bit about whichever variation the writer is most aware of. But I did find this little poem from the 19th century that mentions him, and I find it very interesting because this description is quite a bit different from any of the others that I've come across. The poem paints the Näcken as being lonely, sad, and a little bit trapped, right? I haven't found any stories that discuss him as being sad and lonely, but I have come upon some that involve him falling in love with women who find him. And within these stories, he always ends up returning back to his place in the river or the lake without his love. I suppose that could be what the poet is referring to. He is always described as being alone when he lures people to the water, so it could just be a reference to the fact that he's a solitary creature. Maybe it's those situations that leave him feeling lonely and sad on his little wet rock, like in the poem before. Situations like having to leave his wife. Perhaps the Näcken is sorrowful because he's lived 1,000 lives and has 1,000 lost loves. So he just sits there now playing sad music about it. Maybe. I will share with you a story that I found about the Näcken, which emphasizes his shape-shifting ability. This is a story that came much later than many of the others that you'll find. The story comes after the Christianization of Scandinavia and is strongly influenced by the social and cultural norms that came with that shift in people's lives. So this story tells of a young woman who wanders away from her home to enjoy the warm summer weather. In doing so, she is surely disregarding her chores and duties around the house. For shame. As she is walking through the forest toward the small stream she knows to be nearby, she comes upon a couple of her neighbors. These women try to explain to her that she should not be wandering off to play when she has much work to do at home. She doesn't listen though, so the other ladies decide to accompany her on her little tryst, just to make sure she doesn't get into too much trouble. They come upon the stream to find it cool and inviting. Despite the protests of her neighbors, the young woman plunges into the water and lays on her back, arms out, sighing with delight as the cool water rushes over her. Her neighbors on the shore totally lose their shit and shout to her that she's going to be in so much trouble when she gets home. How foolish. You dumb bitch. A large log was bobbing in the water a ways upstream, and the young woman noticed it as it moved slowly toward her. She thought little of it, aside from the fact that she didn't want to bump into it and get anything slimy on her, standard. She rolls over in the water and kicks her feet, giggling at the women who stood on the shore, looking like they were going to simply pass away from shame. The log bobs closer and closer to her, and she realizes that something does seem off about it. Why is it moving so quickly? Why isn't it following the flow of the stream now? She begins to feel a bit uncomfortable and starts to aim herself toward the shore. I apologize if you hear that. Someone is mowing their lawn nearby. It's recording time. We deal with it. So she moves herself toward the shore, and just then, the log begins to change shape. 2 branches, which stuck out the sides, transformed into long, terrible arms and reached out toward her. The gnarled finger of one caught onto the outer layer of the young woman's dress and tore as she kicked herself away. The ladies on the shore leapt in to grab her and help pull her to shore as they saw the log continue changing shape. It took the shape of a human man, but still covered in bark and damp moss. The creature reached out again to snatch at the young woman, but as she kicked her... And now a trailer drove by. I don't know why I bother. Even just being alive. No one will let me do. He reached out again to snatch at the young woman, but as she kicked, her shoe flew off and clubbed the log man right between the eyes. He stumbled backward just enough for the 3 women to run off into the woods and make their escape. This story is one which highlights the Näcken's ability to shapeshift, his proclivity for drowning women, which he is known mostly to go after women, and the later addition to his lore, in which more recent cultural and social shifts in Scandinavia meant that people wanted a story that warned women to stay home and do their damned chores. One thing that stands out about this story to me is that it's unfortunately bare of details about the Näcken himself, right? He doesn't lure her in with his music. She goes to him of her own free will. Her own misguided attempt to enjoy her afternoon. The only trick that he plays is that of looking like a log, so it doesn't show us about his mischief and his mayhem and the sorts of tendencies that other stories highlight. No mention of his personality or anything. This tells me, as a massive nerd of stories, that it is much less about the Näcken and more about warning women to stick around the house. It's sort of lazy, as far as stories go. It's like some dude decided he needed a scary story to tell his daughters to convince them not to go wander off and shirk their responsibilities, and he had a vague recollection of a water monster that can transform into a log. So he threw that in there as a super basic plot piece. However, this is essentially the primary use of folklore, isn't it? To come up with supernatural reasons for people to do what they're supposed to do. As you may be able to tell, the Näcken has a lot of different stories that people tell about him. These stories have changed a great deal over the centuries, like I said. For example, the earlier known stories of the Näcken paint him as that mischievous, shape-shifting creature that lurks in the water in the shape of a fish or a frog when he's not luring people to their watery deaths. The word Näcken we translate from modern Swedish to naked, so he's usually portrayed as being naked, but the original word nak, or neck, probably comes from the Old Norse word nikur, a word that has been used to describe sea monsters, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing things. Neck could come from a Germanic word that means to bathe. That makes sense with the water, yeah? We actually don't know, but his name most likely didn't originally mean naked. He was in fact depicted as being dressed in nice fancy clothes way back in the day. What gave him away in a lot of stories as being a Näcken in those stories was the dripping water from around the edges of his nice clothes. It wasn't until much later that people began to imagine him as a seductive sort of creature. It may be because the word from which he takes his name sort of disappeared from the early language, and now the word for naked is the one that sounds most similar. It isn't a stretch for the mind to think naked and luring people and put them together to understand that he must be seducing people. Makes sense. He must be very beautiful to do that, yeah? So, add that on. As you can see, we've had to do a lot of speculation here. This is usually the case with these very old folkloric creatures and stories. Those that existed before the spread of Christianity to their home region are often all but wiped out and forgotten. When a new religion becomes prominent in the area, the old beliefs and traditions are not just abandoned, but most often intentionally stomped out. When religion is tied so deeply with the government, it is illegal, or at least very strongly discouraged, to carry on believing in any other religion. This is very much true of what happened in Scandinavia. We have references to those parts of Old Norse paganism because a few Christians back in the day thought that they were interesting enough to write down. But those beliefs and stories that didn't make it into writing long ago have had to cling to life by being passed down by the groups of people who chose not to forget. Family lines that shared the stories with their kids, you know? And this is especially the case with cultures that did not write. Scandinavians, the people of Norway, Sweden, Finland, etc., did not write their stories or their histories down. They passed on the stories which were important to them through oral traditions, folklore. And they talked about it, and they told the tales to the children, and they passed them down through their families and communities. So really, there are very few good sources of information about the Näcken and his kinfolk from way back when, like for the OG versions. You know, we have all of these new versions that we can find from a couple hundred years later, and then we skip a couple hundred years and there's another story and it's a little different. But we don't have much in the way of like the OG Näcken story, right? The original wasn't interesting enough for the Christian writers to put in their books, I suppose. That doesn't mean that people today don't still believe in him and share his story. It's just way different now. Though it does mean that it's hard for an outsider like myself to get all of the information I would like to share with y'all. An interesting development in the lore of the Näcken, following the introduction of Christian thought, is that he is associated in some ways with the devil in a lot of the stories. Because he is an enigmatic and untrustworthy player of music, and we all know that music is bad for your soul, many people began to insert him into Christian stories regarding Satan and the fiddle, or deal-making for one's soul. You know what I'm talking about. Stories began to form in which individuals could find the Näcken intentionally, or they would come upon him in the wild, and when they did so, they could either trick him into teaching them to play music masterfully, which ended up having, usually negative impacts on their lives later on after all that glory wears off, or they could bargain with him for this skill or others. Some say that he can grant other wishes through the bargains in the deals. Often, these deals are a big loss for the human, as they end in the human's death to repay the debt, or the loss of their mortal soul. No more heaven, you know what I mean? And another later development in his lore in regard to the instrument that he plays. So, originally the old school versions, it seems as though he would play a harp instead. And he would sit on the rocks in the evening and he would play a lofty tune on his harp. Later on, when fiddles became the most popular instrument, or violins, the stories shifted to a version where that is what he would play instead. Apparently, violins became the most popular instrument for the lower classes in Sweden starting in around the 1700s. Interestingly, the violin has been referred to as the devil's harp, and we know Satan plays a violin. Everyone knows that. Like Georgia or whatever. Here, we may see another example of how Christianity has influenced the super old pagan stories. And still other times, it's almost always a fiddle now, or violin. But sometimes people will say that he even plays a flute. I really like flutes. I know how to play flute. I think it's a very beautiful instrument, and I wish that it was cooler to other people. So, considering the motivations of the Näcken, it is possible that he's been tasked with killing people in the water, and he's stuck sitting there for eternity so he can make his quota, right? Or is he super lonely and bored, so he's calling people to keep him company, only for them to drown through no fault of his? Or perhaps, does he just like to sit there and play music, but people go and follow it and drown on their own, and he has nothing to do with that part of the whole ordeal? The Näcken, as we are referring to him today, is kind of in a class of fae-like creatures who hang out in the water and lure people in. I've talked about them a little bit in the past. What the Näcken does isn't very original, is what I'm saying. I'm also saying that there are several different entities with similar names and motifs within Scandinavian and Germanic folklore. These creatures are referred to as the Nykker, the Nyx, Neck, Knacker. Really, it seems like there are 1,000 ways to say it that sound basically the same to someone who does not speak that language native. These are water sprites, essentially. They take on many different forms, and their motivations all seem to be ambiguous. Oftentimes, the stories about creatures like this describe them as being malicious. They're weird, angry little guys who really want to just drag you in and drown you. It seems like they aren't motivated by anything other than bloodlust in those stories. In other tales, however, they're generally harmless. Think neutral as hell. They're just hanging out in the water doing what they like to do, and then people find them. The people who find them either have a bad time or they don't. Other times, however, and I think these ones are actually fun, the water sprites are friendly. I think that regardless of what the Näcken's original motivations and intentions were, like in the old stories, he eventually developed to become more of a mischievous, trickster, devil-adjacent kind of guy. Perhaps more often used as a metaphor for not fucking around. And as I'm sure you can tell, the Näcken serves the important purpose of reminding people to be very careful around waterways so that you don't drown. Unlike many of the creatures that I talk about here, though, there are ways to defend against him. Most monster stories simply say, if you go there, it'll eat you. You will die. Simply do not fucking go there. With the Näcken, however, or the Näcken, he doesn't always drown you. People can't always avoid every river or lake, right? You need to bathe, wash your dishes, take a swim, take a dip. Dip it a little, you know what I mean? So, according to what I could find here on the internet, here are the ways to prevent the Näcken from kicking your ass. The first method is to bind him to the shore. This means that he is stuck on land while you are in the water, and therefore he can't grab you and drag you down and murder you. To do this, first you need to throw something into the water before you enter, and you have to say out loud, "Näcken, stay on land," or something like that. And then you can release him when you're done in the water by doing the same thing, but like backwards. So, of course, you say something to the effect of, "Näcken, you can go back in the water." So, you throw the rock in, or whatever you have, and you say, "Näcken, stay on the land, you bastard." And then you can go in the water and do what you need to do, and then when you come out, throw another thing and say, "Näcken, go ahead, you can go back in." Fair enough. Simple, I say. Another point, and this one is very common in beliefs about fairies and certain deities, is the use of his name. Saying the name of a monster or entity or even a god is often believed to either give you power over them or at least take away any power that they have over you. So, it is said that if you see Näcken, or if you are in his territory and you want to have your bases covered, you can simply say his name out loud. Say you need to get into the water for some reason and you simply have a weird feeling about it. You can say, "Näcken, don't be a dick," or even just say his name. And that could very well make him unable to hurt you. Teach people the proper order of things. So, what I mean by that is, if you're going into a space and it's not yours, the proper order is to say, "Hey, you, I know this is your space. I'm coming in for a minute," and say their name while you do so. And there, you kind of teach people basic respect. You respect the water, you respect the mountain, you respect whatever space you're entering, even if it's someone else's home, right? You're like, "Hey, I'm here. Don't kill me, bro. I'll move along." Another way to defeat the Näcken is to simply be very godly. So, in a lot of these stories, people, usually men, this is the men's stories usually, because there's a distinct difference between stories about the Näcken that have women protagonists and stories about the Näcken that have men protagonists. And one of the sources, I'll link below, that I watched about this, had the best information that I found about the Näcken, in fact. Can't remember the name of her channel. Once again, look in the description for her. But she explains that a lot of the stories where women encounter the Näcken, they either die or they escape sheerly by luck or coincidence. But with the men, they escape through tricking the Näcken and getting something from him, or they escape him or get out of the deal with him or something by going and finding a priest, and then the priest does god stuff, or they themselves become very godly in some way and they quote scripture, what have you, and then it defeats him. So a lot of the times if a man comes upon the Näcken, the Näcken is usually only scary if the man is careless or impulsive or doesn't love God enough, you know. The men almost always defeat him. Then one of those ways is by getting a priest, and brings the priest to the water and the priest blesses it. I don't know, I already told you that, but definitely, obviously a later addition, one of those like post-Christian aspects to the Näcken stories. I think it's kind of funny though, you know. And I can't verify this, but I have been told that there is a modern day tradition or event that honors the Näcken called Eretsnek, something like that, which translated means Näcken of the Year. This sounds like a lot of fun. It is a sort of competition where you get like scores and votes or whatever. It's a competition in Sweden where musicians take off all of their clothes and then like they're allowed to cover themselves with plants that they find around, like Adam and Eve style shit, right? And then they go into the water, I believe it's a river. I'm not sure, but the water there, and they play their instrument the best they can in the water somehow. And there's a group of judges who like judges them, rates them, gives them like a scorecard, I imagine, something like that. And they are judging to see which of these musicians is most like the mythical Näcken, the one with the most beautiful music, the one who's probably the most at home, looks happiest in the water, you know what I mean? With a, you know, that seems kind of cool. I wish I had had more time to look into this and learn more about it before having to record on a schedule, but I might look into that more just because it seems amusing, and I encourage you to also, because it's always cool when we have these modern day events and traditions and celebrations that honor those old stories. I know there's like a Rougarou festival in Louisiana that I think would be really cool. I don't know. It's neat. Well, that's about all I got for the Näcken for you. There is a lot more to talk about, and I rushed through a lot of those points about the way the stories evolved, and I had a couple other stories, like the one with the lady in the log, that I wanted to tell you, but like I said, I got shit to do. I recently got to a stable place where I will be staying for a while, and it involves a lot of yard, and that yard needs a lot of work because it is full of wild lettuce, which is a medicinal plant, sure, but it's also very pokey, and my dog won't stop eating it, so I don't want him to get high or sick. He's already got some shit going on. So I'd be out there pulling those fuckers up by hand all day, every day, 10 minutes at a time, and I hand wash my clothes, trad wife style, everything like that. Flies. So, that's all I got for you. When I post this video on Patreon, anyone who wants to talk more about it, I have more information about it that I can share. If you want to go over there, and then I can answer questions if you have any. Things like that. By the way, join my Patreon if you want to support me. You can do so for free, or for $1, or for $5. If you give me money, you get more stuff. I have ideas in the works to give patrons things, but I don't have very many patrons right now. So I need y'all to come and tell me what you want. What you really, really want. I want you to click the like button and leave a comment down below, because all of that engagement helps people who will like me find me. Because I know that there are more people who will like the stuff I do that just don't know I exist. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm feeling awkward. Lots of things interrupted me while I was recording today, and I'm a little bit irritated about it, and this is making me feel better. Look, it's water. It's water. Shit, bye.